But we also, yesterday, I fired the general counsel from ATF. These people were targeting gun owners. Not going to happen under this administration.
If you didn't know, the ATF was recently ordered by a federal court to return seized property to lawful gun owners by a specific deadline. And yet, that deadline came and went without them following through. So what the hell is wrong now? Doesn't the ATF have a pro-Second A acting director? In this video, we'll talk about why the agency is openly defying that court order, how their newest demands could lead to more invasive government oversight, and what we, as law-abiding gun owners, can do to protect our rights. Not long ago, a lawsuit known as NAGR v. Garland forced the ATF to give back forced reset triggers and wide-open triggers that had been seized from people who purchased them legally. When new leadership came in, the case name changed to NAGR v. Bondi. The court order remained the same. Those devices had to be returned. Yet we're well past the court-imposed deadline, and the ATF has not done what was ordered. This is no minor oversight. It's a brazen refusal to comply with a direct judicial ruling. Some of us hope that with fresh voices at the top of the DOJ and ATF, things might improve. Bondi even claimed she fired the agency's chief legal counsel for targeting gun owners. Despite this, we're seeing the same old behavior: stonewalling, using legal contortions to keep people from recovering their property, and insisting on new hurdles that never existed before. Instead of simply handing back items that were seized, the ATF is demanding background checks, membership lists from Pro-2A organizations, and more hoops to jump through. What they're trying to do now is force organizations like the National Association for Gun Rights to reveal details about who belongs to them, claiming they can't identify who should get the seized items otherwise. Let's be realistic. The government knows exactly who they confiscated those triggers from. They don't need a membership roster to figure it out. This is an obvious attempt to create a backdoor registry of law-abiding people who've done nothing wrong. When a court says, "Return the property," the expectation is straightforward: give it back. There's no legitimate reason to impose additional requirements on folks who already complied with the law in the first place. The ATF's suggestion that they need membership data from NAGR is simply unbelievable. Why should a gun rights organization hand over its private information to the very agency that overstepped its authority by seizing property without justification? It's a line in the sand for a lot of us. If we let them demand membership lists in this case, what's next? It sets a precedent that could embolden the ATF to ask for more data in future cases. They might decide that every time they lose in court, they can delay compliance by throwing out new demands for personal information. Equally troubling is the ATF's new condition that owners must undergo background checks before retrieving their confiscated property. These devices were purchased legally, at a time when no additional screening was required. Now, as part of returning them, the agency wants an extra level of scrutiny that wasn't in place when the owners first acquired these triggers. This is not a matter of safety, it's a punitive move. In their response to the court, the DOJ basically said they have administrative difficulties figuring out who qualifies to get their items back, and that background checks and membership lists would help solve these so-called issues. But what do you think? Is this an intentional push to track more gun owners, or an example of bureaucratic overreach that happens whenever an agency faces a ruling they don't like? Comment below. Let's step back and see why this matters so much. A federal court told the ATF to do something by a certain date, and the agency flat out did not comply. If government agencies can ignore court orders without consequences, then we're dealing with more than just one rogue action. We're dealing with a broader problem: unaccountable officials who think they're above the law. Even if people aren't personally affected by these confiscations today, this kind of defiance can affect all of us in the long run. When the ATF finds it convenient to ignore the court in one matter, they may do the same in another. We saw this pattern in past situations like the bump stock ban, where the ATF redefined certain items in a way that many experts said ran afoul of the law. They took regulatory authority too far, and it created confusion among otherwise law-abiding citizens. Then we saw the fiasco with pistol braces, where again they changed definitions and threatened to make millions of people into felons if they didn't comply with a shifting set of regulations. Now we're seeing them hold on to property they've been ordered to return, trying to insert new terms under the pretense of administrative challenges. At the center of this fiasco, We have officials like Bondi, who pledged to restore lawful practices within the agency, and Patel, who was seen as someone that could get the ATF under control. However, the fact that they haven't stepped in to enforce the court's mandate raises serious questions about their true effectiveness. Are they unaware of what's going on, or are they turning a blind eye? Regardless, the end result is the same. The ATF continues to overstep its bounds while defying a judge's direct instruction. Supporters of the Second Amendment have been speaking out for decades about government overreach. This is not a new conversation. Still, it feels like we're crossing a new line when an agency blatantly refuses to follow what the court laid out in black and white. The judge gave them a deadline, said these items are to be returned, and the ATF's response was to throw up roadblocks. How can the agency claim to be promoting safety and fairness when it ignores the very process that's designed to keep its power in check? Some have speculated that the agency's latest actions reflect a pattern that extends beyond just these triggers. If they can strong-arm a membership list out of organizations like NAGR, then they could do the same to other Pro-2A groups or even local gun clubs. That level of intrusion poses a serious threat to privacy, association, and our constitutionally protected rights. Meanwhile, the demand for background checks on items that never required them in the first place is another red flag. You might ask, why do they care now if someone passes a background check? The individuals who originally had these items had already satisfied whatever legal requirements existed at the time. The only reason to introduce new steps is to delay or deter gun owners from retrieving what's rightfully theirs. If the ATF is banking on people giving up or not wanting to jump through these hoops, that's not regulation. It's a tactic to reduce lawful possession by attrition. If we let them get away with this tactic, it sets a dangerous pattern. Next time, they might seize a different accessory or firearm under another shaky rationale, wait for a court to order them to return it, and then impose new demands again. It's a revolving door of legal battles that cost time, money, and peace of mind for regular people, all while the ATF continues to operate without any real accountability. The real question is, what can gun owners do in response? First, we can make sure people know what's happening. Government actions often slide under the radar when folks aren't paying attention. Sharing this information with friends, neighbors, and fellow gun enthusiasts is essential. The ATF might hope that by dragging its feet, they can resolve things quietly and avoid the backlash that comes from violating a court order. Next, we can support and join organizations that actively fight this type of behavior in the legal arena. Groups like the Firearms Policy Coalition, Gun Owners of America, and the NAGR are at the forefront of challenging unconstitutional measures. They file lawsuits, raise awareness, and push back against agencies that refuse to stay within the bounds of the law. A lawsuit has already succeeded in compelling the ATF to return these items, but now that the agency is playing games, the same or similar groups might have to go back to court to enforce compliance. We can also contact our representatives and demand that they hold the ATF accountable. Many lawmakers claim to support the Second Amendment, but statements mean nothing if they won't confront the agency when it flouts legal decisions. A federal court order is not optional, and if an agency can ignore it, we need our elected officials to step in and say, enough. They have the power of oversight, funding, and legislation that can put the brakes on an out-of-control bureaucracy. Another angle is to keep an eye on how these tactics might evolve. We should watch if the ATF uses similar justifications for any future grabs, whether for triggers, magazine capacity devices, or anything else. The pattern is clear. The ATF declares an item illegal or heavily regulated, seizes it, then drags out returning it until they impose new stipulations. This is not how the legal system is supposed to function. We rely on checks and balances, but those checks and balances fail if the system allows one agency to act with impunity. We also need to question whether Bondi and Patel will come forward with a clear explanation. Are they going to cite ignorance, say they didn't realize the ATF was refusing to return the items? Or are they going to justify it as some administrative mishap that got out of hand? Either way, it's a poor reflection on an administration that claimed it would uphold the rule of law. People voted for changes that would respect the Second Amendment, but this fiasco indicates those changes are superficial if the ATF is still ignoring court rulings. To put it plainly, the ATF's actions prove that they're the same agency they've always been, running the same playbook: intimidate gun owners, stall in court, and find creative ways to restrict rights. They just happen to be doing it under a different set of names at the top. True change means more than a few administrative shifts. It requires genuine accountability that includes serious consequences for ignoring the law. When a court hands down a ruling, it's not a suggestion. It's a mandate that must be followed. If you or I ignored a court order, we'd be held in contempt. We'd face potential fines or worse. Why shouldn't the ATF face the same repercussions if it flouts the judicial system's directives? The idea that a government agency can keep items that it was ordered to return should concern anyone who cares about the Constitution. The question remains, who's going to enforce the order if the ATF won't? We rely on our legal system, so perhaps the court that issued the judgment will intervene again. Maybe another lawsuit will be launched to force compliance. In the meantime, people who had their property taken are left in limbo, and that's unacceptable. But if we don't hold these agencies accountable, they'll continue to test the boundaries of what they can get away with. It's on us to speak out, stay informed, and rally around those organizations and representatives willing to push back. We may not see overnight results, but ignoring the problem will guarantee it only grows worse. This is how rights get chipped away, one slow, bureaucratic move at a time. The next time the ATF or any agency tries to force a private association to hand over personal data or tries to impose retroactive background checks, we need to demand real answers. They can't hide behind a claim that they need membership lists just to figure out who is entitled to an item they seized. They know who they confiscated them from, and they know how to return them. Anything else is a smokescreen. I think it should worry everyone that an agency with the authority to regulate firearms can behave like this. But what do you think? Am I just overreacting? Let's talk about it in the comments. Share details about these developments with your community. Talk about them at your local range, and make sure others understand that the fight isn't over just because the ATF lost in court. A legal victory means nothing if the agency doesn't comply. If this video was helpful in any way, please like, share, subscribe, and click on the bell icon for more of these videos. Thanks for watching.